I applied to the city of Dallas. I wanted to get into their internship program, but that didn't work out. And then I ran across an advertisement for an opening for a research associate at the Bureau of Municipal Research here at the University of Texas. And that worked out, and we moved back, Dorothy and I, and started work there with Dr. Stuart McCorkle, who was the head at the time, in September of 1947.
Now you need to tell us, the Bureau of Municipal Research at the University of Texas became
the Institute of Public Affairs, and that later was merged into the LBJ School.
Quite a story. You were at the Institute then for a few years.
3 years.
3 years.
And the city manager, Guyton Morgan, here in Austin, was looking for a personnel director. I didn't think I was really all that well suited for long-term research. I wanted to be a little more active and still interested in city management. So I saw this as an opportunity to get into city government itself, and took that position as personnel director for the city of Austin in September of 1950, I guess.
That was really your first management level experience in a city then, as personnel director. Pretty significant responsibility for a young guy. What was the biggest challenge you faced in that first management level role?
I think the biggest challenge maybe was the fact that there had been an outstanding lady who had done some work in that area, and she was passed over, which in a way was unfortunate because she was very well qualified, and working with her, she couldn't have been nicer. But I think trying to be sure that I gave her ample latitude in her work, working with me. And then in addition to that, we instituted a group insurance program for city employees, a job classification system which had never been done, and we also brought the city federal credit union into really a greater prominence. It had operated out of a little office down at the electric utility, and did not have payroll deduction for these employees. Many of them were very low paid, and we worked with the finance director to get payroll deduction for them on their car loans and so forth. And from there, the credit union just took off by leaps and bounds into a gigantic operation, really.
You really then helped modernize the entire personnel administration at the city at that time, as there was hope.
Well, I think there were a number of things going on that we'd like to think that yes, we helped modernize and bring it into a human resource department that most of them are called now.
Was that let me ask you differently, did you have other assignments while you were at the city of Austin also?
I stayed as personnel director 2 years, and then the city manager, Walter Seaholm, at the time had an opening for an assistant in his office, and I took that job for 3 years as administrative assistant to the city manager. Then in 1955 became assistant city manager and served in that position for 5 years. At that time, I was the only assistant. Now they have 4 or 5, but at that time, I was the only one. Bill Williams, the city manager, didn't enjoy working with the media all that much. He didn't enjoy answering citizen complaints, so I got a healthy dose both of working with the media and of answering phone calls that he asked me to take care of.
Well, that had to be a pretty good experience then for your next step in your professional life.
Yes, in 1960, the city of Waco was ready for another city manager. Jack Jeffrey, the city manager, took a position in Beaumont, which at that time was more of a thriving city than it is now, really. And I applied. We went through an interview process and was employed as city manager of Waco.
Now let's think about that for a minute. Your first city management job, and you were how old about that time?
Let's see, less than 40.
Yeah, yeah.
And between 35 and 40, I can't calculate right quick.
Well, that's okay. But the point being that this is a big job, responsible job in a city the size of Waco. You're the chief executive officer. And it's an unusual experience for young people to have that kind of opportunity that early in their career.
Yeah, I was very grateful. We had, I think, I'd have to say that I had the help of the newspaper editor, and that was because of my wife. My wife had worked at the Waco paper back when she had just finished in high school and was going to Baylor. And Harry Province was the editor then. He was exempt from the draft. He was poor and had some health problems. So Harry was her supervisor along with some others, and she made a very favorable impression, and that transferred to me, thank goodness.
Well, I will add to that, having known, of course, you and Dorothy for many years, that she certainly did add a lot to you and to your life and career, and everybody that knew her. So you were in Waco then as city manager for how
3
long?
years.
3 years?
Yeah.
What was the toughest thing you had to do while you were in Waco?
It would seem strange now, perhaps, but the toughest thing was to desegregate the waste collection department. It consisted entirely of white males, and there were a number of African Americans that had made application but had been routinely turned down. I decided that that was not fair, and we were passing an opportunity to broaden our employment situation. So we integrated the department. The city manager's office was on the 3rd floor of City Hall, in fact still is. And I came to work one morning, and a little later was surrounded down on the ground. They were down on the ground parading around, some of the employees protesting the employment of African Americans, and that continued for several hours while I could see them outside my 3rd floor window, and was glad at the time I wasn't any closer than that to the situation. But it worked out. The newspaper gave us strong backing again, as they did all through my tenure there, and it worked out, and it was one of the most challenging. We had some water problems in fire and police departments, as happens in many cases, but I enjoyed it very much. It was a fine first assignment, and we felt like we made a contribution.
Coming back, a little bit coming back home, coming back to Waco after the years you'd spent at Baylor too.
Right.
And as other young managers have found, there were other opportunities that opened for you. And what was the next move?
Then after 3 years there, I moved to Garland, which was a slightly smaller city, but actually had its electric utility, and the city manager job paid considerably more than Waco. We'd always liked the DFW area, and Garland was really blossoming at that time. So we took that position as city manager. We again inherited the electric utility, which Waco did not have, and not too many cities do. But that was a great experience working. There was a Texas Power Pool, composed of cities that had their own electric utility, smaller cities, Garland, Denton, and Bryan, and it was very interesting working with them, as well as a lot of work with developers. Garland was beginning to grow, and we had development challenges, developers wanting to come in, bend rules, and ignore rules, and this was a challenge.
It's often been said about baseball managers and city managers that there are two kinds, those that have been fired and those that will be fired. Was that ever your experience?
That certainly was. We got crosswise with the council in Garland on the electric utility franchise. The Garland had its electric utility and supplied 80% or so of the power in the city, but Texas Power and Light had 20%. Their 50-year franchise came up for renewal in 1964, and I wrote to Lubbock. I knew Lubbock had competing electric utilities, both city and private, and got their franchise ordinance came back about 10 or 15 pages with a number of provisions in it that would protect the city. Our ordinance at the time in Garland was one page, and I had a majority on the council that wanted to just renew that one-page ordinance. I felt was a mistake, wrote a rather lengthy memorandum to the council, and the mayor and four others did not take kindly to it, and so one day I was fired on a 5-4 vote.
Public meeting.
In a public meeting.
City council meeting. People knew probably what was happening, I'm assuming, or not?
Oh, they most certainly did. I guess the most traumatic thing is I left there, started casting out fishing lures for another job, of course, and actually landed one here with the governor's office. But back on while that was taking place, Dorothy and the 3 kids were still in Garland. They were in school, and the most traumatic part about the whole thing is a former mayor, highly regarded, the biggest car dealer in Dallas County at the time, came before the council demanding answers as to why I was fired, and he dropped dead of a heart attack on the council floor while he was making the presentation. Dorothy had to go through the funeral, and so she earned several merit badges, not only then, but a lot of other places in my career.
You know, that episode in Garland was a pivotal moment. Obviously, in your career, it set you off another path. But at the same time, it does highlight the integrity that a professional manager brings to that assignment, brings to that job. Because there are times when you simply have to say no. You're called to say no. And I think it would be fair to me to add that you were a man dependent upon an income. This wasn't as if that you had just massive amounts of resources available you could fall back on. You were in a career, you had a wife and you have children, and to face that decision in those circumstances, to be willing to stand up, really says something about both you and also what's expected of good managers. Is that a fair statement?
I think it's well put. I felt like that it was a defining moment, as you say. I felt like I had no other choice but to give the best advice that I could. I wasn't trying to make the decision for them. That's their decision, but I wanted them to have all the facts and have all of the comparative data such as I had from Lubbock. And I didn't think it would take that that drastic a turn, but I was prepared, and it was a very a moment that you had to think about, because I had no other income, as you said. I had 3 young kids in school. Dorothy was doing some writing as usual and making a little bit of income, but not a lot. And I depended on the fact that my taking a stand would still hold me in good stead in getting another job.
Well, as it turned out, part of that pivot was to a different phase of your career. And tell us about working for Governor John Connally.